Yeah, I can recording after this, and I'll also send out these slides that I'm about to go through in an email. So I'll follow up with that. Um, but yeah, I do have some slides I just wanted to go through, introducing us to D2L. I don't think I've met you before, Deborah. I was just speaking to Quincy, but I'm Anna Young, of course. I'm an instructional designer in the Office of Online Learning. So if you have any further questions after this presentation or after we go through all of this, feel free to follow up with me, shoot me an email. If you want to take a look at a rubric that you have in a specific course, happy to do that anytime.
Okay. I had developed one. I had some issues with when I was grading using Turnitin and trying to
Oh,
grade using the rubric, using the old view versus the new view. Each one was giving me different issues, but that
oh,
was a
okay.
semester ago when I'm not teaching. I'm using somebody else's rubric this semester, so in reading, but
Okay.
it was something that I had developed with Elizabeth Stein, but hers was working fine and mine was not
Hmm.
working the way it was supposed to. And I talked with Diana Blackburn about it. I may even have
Hmm.
talked with Heather, and we never got it figured out. So I think I want to just construct a new rubric for my next course and not roll that one over.
Yeah, we can take a look at that issue with Turnitin. I seem to vaguely remember that being an issue that a couple of instructors ran into, maybe with one of the recent updates where rubrics, they were having trouble with rubrics integrating with Turnitin. I'm happy to
I don't
take,
know if it's
take some
because,
time and look at that, or we can work
yeah,
on creating a
is it
new
a
one.
Mac related issue? Everybody said no, but um, some
No,
people.
I don't think it would be. It would probably
Okay.
it's something internal to either D2L or Turnitin.
Okay.
But we can see if it's maybe they fixed it. I'm not entirely sure. I've never used rubrics in the Turnitin grade mark feedback, but we can look at that certainly.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so I just had a couple of slides I was going to go through. Wasn't sure how many people were going to come, and so I just, but we can quickly breeze through these and just get right to business and start talking about rubrics specifically in D2L. I kind of took a broad view thinking about this, and so wanted to talk a little bit, just about what are rubrics, what are the components of a successful rubric, why should we use them. I think D2L rubrics are often a very much underutilized tool. They're a great and powerful tool for grading, but oftentimes it's something that's a little bit hidden, and I think a lot of instructors don't use or don't know how to use them. So, um, just wanted to point out some of the advantages of using rubrics. And a little bit of advice on how to use rubrics effectively, some effective best practices for integrating them into your course, making them work for you. And then, like I said, we're going to jump right into, the business part of this, the technical details of how to set up rubrics in D2L and how to use rubrics to grade in D2L, and any other questions you might have, at which point I'll switch over to my browser and we will look at all of this in D2L. Um, as for what rubrics are, um, I'm sure both of you are aware because you've used rubrics before, but it's just very simply a tool that just communicates an instructor's expectations and what the grading criteria are for an assignment. So just making that especially explicitly clear to students when they attempt an assignment. The basic components of a rubric are criteria, so essentially the categories in which you are grading a student on. So for instance, if you're grading an essay, you might have criteria like, do they have a good argument? Do they make great use of evidence? And stylistically and organizationally, does the flow of the essay make sense? So those are some example criteria you might have. Deborah, what discipline do you teach in? Did you say reading?
Well, I typically am with ESL, but this
Oh, okay.
semester I was working with Kathy Sorensen and doing reading support for ESL students.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, uh,
She had everything already set up,
oh, I see.
but
Okay.
when I'm creating my own courses, that's when I,
Mm-hmm.
want to set up a rubric. And I've
Okay.
only done so once or twice and had all kinds of issues with it, but that was before.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask just to get a sense of what kind of assignments you typically would have, and thus what kind of rubrics you might end up
Mostly
having for
grading writing.
for writing. Yeah, so same thing. Like, is kind of the main point of the what they're writing clear? Is it organized? Is it stylistically polished? In case of ESL, does it follow kind of standard conventions in English writing? So those are just some examples of criteria that a rubric might have, but it could vary widely depending on the assignment and depending on what discipline you're coming from, of course. Descriptors, those are just a short amount of text that you can add into your rubric explaining to the student what exactly you're looking for in those criteria. So for instance, if you're evaluating on the basis of evidence, you might describe a successful use of evidence as having claims that are supported with evidence from the text. And then finally, of course, performance levels or rating scale on which you're grading all of those criteria, from good to bad, from a AA2 to a 0, just arranging those categories along a performance level. So those are the three main criteria or the main components of a rubric, and those are the three main pieces that we'll see when we get into building those rubrics in D2L. As for why I use rubrics, there are a lot of advantages to using rubrics. Of course, they help reinforce assignment instructions. So you may have criteria that you express in your assignment instructions that you want students to follow when they're developing their submission, but rubrics can help reinforce that further by showing how integrating what you have instructed them to do into their assignment will result in a better or worse grade. Helps to clarify expectations of what exactly it is that you're looking for in an assignment. And that's especially important in essay writing, I think, especially because from the student perspective anyway, sometimes the criteria that we're evaluating essays on can seem somewhat subjective, or they might be unclear about, say, what a good argument is or what good use of evidence is. So a rubric is a good place to clarify what you're expecting and maybe deconstruct or explain some of those more kind of subjective grading criteria are. Helps to reduce student anxiety, student complaints about grades, because they can see kind of a quantifiable demonstration of exactly where their grade came from and how it was calculated.
Even though that's still a subjective measure when you get down to it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It is still highly subjective, indeed, especially with essay writing. But just clarifying what it is that you're expecting on the front end can help, I think, work through some of that ambiguity that might exist when you're evaluating student assignments. Especially for those students who are kind of right on the edge of is this an A paper or B paper, and yeah, so it can be helpful to the student, but it could also be helpful to you for helping to clarify what exactly qualifies a paper or an essay as being a paper in a particular criteria. And to that point, it also can help ensure consistency and fairness in grading, especially for those really subjective criteria, just kind of holding you to however it is that you defined success consistently across all of your student submissions. And from the instructor perspective, rubrics are great too because they make your job a whole lot easier. Quincy and I were just talking earlier before you came in, Deborah, about how rubrics are great because they can really save you a lot of time writing feedback that might be highly repetitive across many student essays. So if you find yourself frequently writing the same thing, like, could you clarify what your thesis statement is? Could you provide some examples? Could you explain what you mean? Things like that. If you find that you're writing that a lot on different student essays, rubrics can cut down on the time that you're spending on that because it allows you to provide kind of generic feedback that you often are providing to students repetitively. And you can also attach, in D2L, you can attach a rubric to multiple assignments. So you can just create one rubric, say, for your discussions, for your weekly assignments, and then use that as your basis for grading when you're going through those submissions. So it's great for the student, it's great for the instructor as well. There are two types of rubrics, and I'll just briefly explain the difference between those two because those are your two options that you have in D2L. So we're just going to go through and break apart what exactly that means. So there are two types of rubrics. There's the holistic rubric and the analytic rubric. And the essential difference between these is the number of criteria that you're grading on between these two different rubrics. So a holistic rubric only has a single criteria that you're grading based on. And I have an example on the next slide that'll maybe make that a little bit clearer what that looks like. In D2L, that means you're essentially going to have one row across of performance levels for a single criteria. If it's helpful, an example of a holistic rubric that we might be familiar with is AP exam scores. A lot of exam scores, actually, like SAT scores, they grade on a scale of 1 through 5. They're not breaking apart different kind of criteria, like how well did you construct your essay and how well did you provide evidence or things like that. It's a single criteria. It's a single scale, 1 through 5. An analytic rubric provides much more detailed, much more targeted feedback across multiple criteria. It allows you to evaluate multiple criteria across a scale. So if you want to grade based on different criteria like quality of argument or quality of evidence, quality of reasoning, that's what an analytic rubric will let you do. And that's probably the one we're most familiar with coming from writing heavy disciplines, because often you'll see these with essay rubrics. And here's just a quick example I snagged from Cult of Pedagogy to illustrate the difference between holistic rubrics and analytic rubrics based on the example of breakfast in bed. So if you were going to evaluate your experience getting breakfast in bed, you might use a holistic rubric, which doesn't break apart different criteria. It's just 4 through 1. Was it a great experience having breakfast served to you in bed, or was it a subpar experience? You'll see in the description field, for instance, for a level 4 breakfast experience, all food is perfectly cooked, presentation surpasses expectations, and recipient is kept exceptionally comfortable throughout the meal. So those could be, in an analytic rubric, broken apart into separate criteria, but here they're all kind of smashed together into a single, performance level, as indicated by like 4 through 1, those numbers. Holistic rubrics, they might be useful for quickly grading things like exam scores or something like that. My issue with holistic rubrics, though, is that I find that a lot of students kind of fall between the cracks with these, especially with essays. Something like essays where there are many kind of components that make a successful essay. So you might have students who kind of fall between a 4 and a 3, for instance. So that's why I'm not a huge fan of holistic rubrics for essays anyway. The analytic rubric is probably going to be more applicable to Deborah and Quincy, you guys, in your grading, because an analytic rubric takes all those criteria that were smashed together into a single description in the holistic rubric and breaks them apart. So taking the example of breakfast in bed, it considers the experience of breakfast in bed in its separate component parts. So how was the food? How was the presentation? And how was the comfort experienced by the recipient? And how would you rank each one of those? That's what a rubric, an analytic rubric, allows you to do. So it gives you the opportunity to provide more specific, detailed, targeted feedback across a variety of different categories. Any questions about that, about the difference between holistic versus analytic?
No.
Okay.
I found even with the analytics, sometimes when I'm comparing students' performance, that sometimes I have to override the rubric
Yeah.
score and give the student another like 0.5 or whatever.
Yeah, that's true, especially with essays being just a little bit subjective. Because it's interesting because no matter how much planning you kind of put into a rubric, just trying to foresee the common pitfalls that students might fall into, there are always special cases, or students will do things that you maybe didn't expect, that kind of throw the rubric off a little bit. So fortunately, analytic rubrics give you a little bit of flexibility with that, and D2L also gives you a little bit of flexibility in terms of being able to override a score for a student in a particular criteria. Yeah, so that's a great point, Deborah. As for using rubrics effectively, whether offline or online, I just wanted to share just 3 quick tips and tricks for making sure that rubrics are doing what you want them to do and that they're working for you effectively. And those are, just make sure to provide the rubric in advance. It seems a little bit, maybe that's obvious, but just make sure that students have access to that in advance. And also, as you may know, D2L sometimes has issues in terms of making sure that things are that students are able to access things when you want them to access them. So just take a little bit of care in making sure that that is set up correctly. Measure what really matters. I'll talk about what I mean by that exactly. And then just make sure that you weight your criteria appropriately. And also D2L has functionality that allows you to take all of these into account. So what I mean by provide the rubric in advance, again, kind of obvious. We're probably already inclined to do this, but just to provide the rubric with the instructions. In D2L, you can attach the rubric directly to the assignment, so students can see that when they are submitting the assignment, they'll see the rubric attached to it, and so they'll already know what to expect in terms of how they're going to be graded. And if you want to go above and beyond, it can also be helpful to invite student questions, have them review the rubric in advance. If they have any questions about what things mean, just give them the opportunity to ask that, and also provide some successful models can also be helpful because, rubrics are great for breaking down our, subjective criteria about what makes a good essay into more discrete components, but sometimes even then students might not know exactly what we mean by things. So for instance, in this example I have over here, if I was asking for students to create responses that use appropriate evidence and to support the claims that they make, maybe students don't know what I mean exactly by, well, what is appropriate evidence and what's a claim, and how do I link those two things together. So that's one thing that you might take the opportunity to have a discussion about in class if you're meeting on Zoom or in individual consults with students. And then models can also be helpful for seeing on the page what exactly good use of evidence looks like, because I find students really struggle with that a lot of times if they're, especially in research papers, being able to effectively muster evidence to support their points. So explaining that in advance can be helpful. And then measure what really matters. So sometimes you see rubrics that include criteria that don't necessarily align with your learning objectives, which it's your learning objectives that are the most important part of the assignment. And when you're grading students, ideally you want to be grading them based on whether or not they've met whatever objective it is that you set. So I'll explain what I mean by that. And I have an example here, again, also borrowed from Cult of Pedagogy, which is a great resource. But say if you were teaching an astronomy course and you wanted students to create a model that demonstrated the phases of the moon, the lunar phases. So you put together some criteria, and here we have an example of a rubric that associated with this assignment where the students are being graded on their creativity, the model accuracy, the attractiveness, mechanics, and timeliness. At the same time, though, I mean, you kind of have to ask, if your learning objective is to have students produce a model of the lunar phases and presumably to show that they know what the lunar phases are and be able to successfully and accurately depict them, maybe some of these criteria don't necessarily make sense for achieving that goal. So, for instance, attractiveness. I'm sure we'd love to see a more attractive model rather than a less attractive model that shows students have put effort into it. But does that really show that the student um, is able to accurately depict the phases of the moon? Maybe that may be just a little bit irrelevant to kind of the larger objective, as well as timeliness. I mean, people have different preferences in terms of their acceptance of late work, but um, I don't know that I would really want to give students points just for turning something in on time, because what if they, create a very attractive model of the lunar phases and they turn it on time, but it's completely inaccurate, then you might end up giving them points for um, just for for not even though they didn't really meet kind of the higher objective that's at stake here. So there's ways to integrate, kind of your preferences in terms of how you want the actual result to look, and timeliness and adherence to instructions, but also make sure that you're putting your learning objectives front and center. So here's an example of a revised version of that same rubric where model accuracy, model functionality, and scientific reasoning are the main criteria that the model is being graded on, and really only secondarily on other things like attractiveness or timeliness and things like that. And then finally, it's important when designing a good rubric to think about weighting your criteria appropriately. So some criteria are more important than others. So like we saw with the lunar phases model example, um, model accuracy, for instance, is probably something that's more important to the student's success on the assignment than other things. So in that regard, you can assign more points to more important criteria and less points to less important criteria. D2L allows you to do this using the custom points tool for analytic rubrics, and I really recommend using that, because as you know, since most of the assignments you both accept are essay assignments, it's important that students adhere to mechanics and grammar and spelling and things like those. But ultimately and usually, there's some kind of larger learning objective that should probably be weighted more heavily than just following spelling or mechanical guidelines. Though that may vary. That depends on your preference and what your learning objectives are. Because Deborah, I know you teach ESL, so maybe that is weighted really high. That's just something to consider.
Yeah, are you going to show us how to use custom points when we build a rubric? Or
Yes, we will. We are ready to switch over. I'm done with my spiel about rubrics and why they're important, and we're ready to go into D2L. And so I was just going to go through, I've got a couple of screenshots actually, just so you can get a sense of what exactly students see. You may already be familiar with this, because Deborah, you were mentioning some difficulties you were having between the new evaluation experience and the old evaluation experience, but here's just a quick look at what a rubric attached to assignment allows you to do. As you can see here, you can grade in line with the student submission, so you're not having to switch between different windows constantly. You can just click which criteria the student has met in their assignment. Over here on the right, the old evaluation experience and D2L lets you do something kind of similar, except the assignment was down below rather than on the side. But either way, it was all on the same page. The thing you both may not have gotten a glimpse of before is just what students see, and I just wanted to highlight this because I think it's important to see what it is that students are seeing on their end. And I had mentioned before, they will see a rubric that's attached to an assignment, and so this is a assignment Dropbox where they're about to submit an assignment, and you can see that they've got a rubric right here, so they know exactly what their grading criteria are when they go to submit the assignment. And also, this is great too. When students receive a grade on an assignment that had a rubric, they'll get the grade in their grades area, and then they can also click on the link to the rubric to see how they scored as far as the rubric goes.
So can I interrupt and just ask
Yeah.
you, on the rubrics that Kathy Sorensen set up,
Mm-hmm.
um, attached to the, not in the Dropbox, but attached to the content in the assignment, she has that large rubric, that you just showed, that
Oh,
you,
this one?
yeah, the student view.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure how you do that,
Oh,
how you get that. I mean, I'm not even, I don't know if it populates automatically. I mean, the rubric that I have in my last writing class
mm-hmm.
is the slide before this one where you see each individual line that, yeah, that they check off.
Yeah. Oh,
And my
yeah.
problem was that it just wasn't showing up on the same, it was showing up as a separate file on my computer. So I had to use a really large screen so I could see them both. But
Oh, okay. Well,
I
that's a
didn't
good.
know what the students actually saw and whether if you set it up like this, does that other,
They will see something like this, I believe. So if they are in their grades, they see they got a graded rubric, they click on that link, and then I think it takes them to a page much like this one.
so
But
this
it's
is
it's
automatically generated from the other one? Or you have
um
to?
from the one where the instructor put the input in, like where the instructor selected
Mhm.
each box. Yeah. So this particular screenshot is an instructor view, but from the student view, it'll look exactly like this, except it'll be totally static. So where the instructor can come in here and click and change where the check marks are that you see on the screen. It'll just be kind of grayed out and fixed for the student, so no changes can be made on their end. Does that answer your question? I think
Well,
there's also something else.
I
There's
think
two.
so, but where is this instructor view? Where do you?
Um, so I don't. So I'm able to kind of switch between instructor and student view. I don't think that's something that instructors can do. I just
No, we
that's
can't.
why yeah that's why I wanted to grab some screenshots while I was in student view just to show you what they see. I I think instructors should be able to see what their students can see, but unfortunately that's not enabled. So
But
that's why I included
Kathy,
that.
Kathy has this view attached to the bottom of all her assignments. And then
Yes,
when
and
I grade, I have, the other thing that I'm clicking.
mhm.
Um, but
Yeah, so
so I just don't know how, if I were setting up a class, how I could put this at the bottom of my Dropbox assignments so that,
yeah.
students could just
Well,
get there.
we could walk through that. There may I'm not entirely I'll have to switch over to D2L and kind of ask you to show me what exactly is going on. What I think possibly what could be going on is that are you aware that so there are two evaluation experiences? That's what they call them, evaluation experiences. There's this new one. This is the new one where it's on the sidebar, and this is the old one. So it's possible, and you can switch between those, and I'll show you how. But it's kind of hidden, but whichever one is your preference, you can switch between them, and that may be why another instructor's evaluation screen looks different than yours, is because they are in a different. They're in the old evaluation experience
Well,
rather than the
she
new
has
one.
the new one,
Oh,
for the
mhm,
grading. This is how I grade. But
mhm.
then at the bottom of the students' assignments in the Dropbox, she has what
Mhm.
looks like this other one that you showed, but not for grading, just for them to say, this is the rubric, look at it. It's right
Oh,
here.
like this one?
They don't have to click into anything. It's just at the bottom of her assignment.
Oh, okay.
And I'm wondering where she got
Hmm.
where she got it and how she moved it there.
It
But
it doesn't so it
I
doesn't
could
look
ask
like
her. I
this.
mean, I don't want to monopolize your session about
No,
this.
you're good. This is again, this is why I love having just two people, is because we can work through your particular questions. So it doesn't look like this. It's like she has instructions and then the rubric at the bottom.
Well,
Is
I
that
can
correct?
show you later when you're finished if you
Yeah,
like.
sure. Or we could even if well, yeah, we could if you want to stick around after um or if you're able to stick around after 1:30 or so, I'd be happy to take a look at one of your courses. We may have to do that to be able to figure out exactly what you're describing. I'm not entirely sure, but we
Right,
can.
and I'm sure Quincy has some issues too, so I don't know.
Oh no, you're good. You're good.
Okay,
As I'm going through this, if if we come across a screen where you're like, oh yeah, that's what was going on, then just let me know. Um,
okay.
but because that it might come up once we go through how to attach an assignment or a rubric to an assignment. Um, but we will get that resolved one way or the other. Um, so yeah, let's switch over to D2L now and actually get into how to make a rubric in D2L, which is what this is all about. Um, so you all may already know this, so I apologize. Apologies if I'm repeating information you already know, but I don't make any assumptions about that. So let's say you're in your course. You find rubrics by going over to the Edit Course button in your nav bar, and they are down here under Assessment. So rubrics. Part of the reason why this is probably an underutilized tool is that it's a little bit hidden. And then we can just practice making a new rubric. I've got a couple in here that I can show you. This was the one I showed you on a previous slide. So this is an analytic rubric attached to a discussion assignment. So you can see D2L allows you to have your criteria here in this far left column. So things like analysis, evidence, style, interaction with others, the kinds of things you might grade a discussion assignment on. And of course, you're free to change those to whatever meets your assignment specifications. And then you have your performance levels up here at the top. By default, D2L goes 4, 3, 2, 1, but you can also change the names of those to whatever you choose. And then you can also specify the score or the maximum score associated with each criteria, which is listed over here in the far right-hand corner. So let's go through and just practice creating a new rubric. You just click New Rubric. If you're in a live course, it might be a good idea to first set the status of your rubric to draft. So that published means that students can see it. Draft means that they can't. So until you're actually finished creating it, it might be a good idea to do that. So let's say we wanted to create a weekly assignment rubric. So just give our rubric a name. And then we have a couple of choices here to make. We can choose to either have a holistic rubric, which we went over. So you can see it just has one row for one criteria, or an analytic rubric, which I imagine is probably all of our preference for essays, where you can add multiple criteria. So we'll put our criteria over here. And one other tip I'll share with you guys is I often like to make my rubric in Word first, just because I find Word is much more flexible than D2L is, as you may know, with just about anything in D2L. And then just copy and paste the contents of my rubric over. And that's what I'm going to do in this particular
It's
instance.
just a table that you've created
Just a table, yeah. If you just go into Word
and create a
scroll
table.
down.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly insert table, and you
Okay.
just create a table with your columns representing different levels of performance. So level 4, level 3, level 2, level 1, and then your rows representing criteria. And I can share this if you would like to have this document just as a template as well. So I'm going to move that over, and I'm just going to copy and paste because I don't want to type a whole bunch of stuff over. Well, first we have to also determine how we want to score this. So with analytic rubrics, you have 2 options, or 3 options really, no score. So really all you're providing is feedback, no score associated with the rubric. Points, which is kind of the standard option. You'll see in level 4, it defaults to 4 points. You can change these amounts, of course. But in this particular instance, 4 points would apply to anything in this column. So let's say you had a criteria over here for accuracy, and you had a criteria over here for evidence. Both of those are worth 4 points at the highest level, or 3 points at this level, 2 points, 1 point. Your other final option is custom points, which will allow you to customize the weighting of different criteria. So you'll see we had in points, we had 4, 3, 2, 1 up here at the top associated with each column. And custom points, those numbers jump down here, and you can associate a different number of points with each criteria. So say I want evidence to be worth 5 points, and we can change that here. Or maybe I want this to be 6 points. 6, 5, 4. It doesn't work out perfectly, but something like that. So it allows you to assign a different weight to different criteria, which might be useful if you have criteria that just don't matter as much to kind of accomplishing your overall objective. So you'll put your criteria here. You can add additional columns by clicking here. So if you want, say, a level 5, you can add that here. If you want to kind of space out different performance levels a little bit more, you can come down here and you can add additional criteria as well by clicking Add Criterion. And then say we want style there. And you can have as many as you want, as many rows and as many columns as you want. You can tailor the points to however you wish. If you want to delete a column, there's a little trash can there for deleting. If you prefer to have kind of the lowest level shown first, or if you just mess up and you want you did it backwards, you want to switch it, you can click reverse level order. Well, the one thing I would recommend is just being consistent. If you have multiple rubrics in a course, just being consistent about which order you go in. So what I mean is just be consistent as to whether you want the lowest criteria to appear first or the highest criteria. I generally like to have the highest criteria appear first because that's what I want students to shoot for. Then in this box here, this is where you'll add your description. I'm just going to copy and paste from my Word document. So, and this is just a description of what success at this level looks like. So since this is the highest level, maybe I'll rename this to exemplary. And an exemplary example of accuracy is a response or responses that each provide a clear, appropriate, factually correct answer to the question. If the question asks for a student's position, that position is clearly explained. And then, maybe the next level, we'll call that proficient. So in this case, maybe their responses to the question contain a couple of minor factual errors or slightly inaccurate. But on the whole, they're clear, they're understandable, and they're mostly factually correct. And then we just continue to scale down from there. So maybe this is adequate. You're free to, kind of use however you want to describe different levels of performance here. Or you can just go with the levels if you prefer to just stick with numbers. It's a little bit more neutral, maybe. So an adequate response maybe contains major factual errors or misconceptions, or it's unclear, it's confusing, it doesn't fully answer all the questions that were asked, or it doesn't fully explain the answer in the way that a reader could understand. So, and then I'm going to delete this last one because I really only have 4. Maybe needs improvement is usually the language that I prefer for kind of the lowest level needs improvement or developing. And maybe in this instance, questions are not fully answered or answered incorrectly. And I'm almost done with this, but one other technique I just wanted to show that might save you a little bit of time in terms of writing descriptions for each criteria is, for instance, with style. So maybe you have I mean, it's really good. It's really easy to describe what a really good essay looks like, right? So a really good essay, employs good grammar, clear and correct spelling throughout. It's stylistically correct. We know what that looks like. So maybe it's easier to just define what a good essay looks like here in the exemplary category at the highest level of performance. So let's say in the style, an exemplary essay answers all parts of the question, all responses are free of spelling, grammatical errors, etc., etc. This will save you maybe a little bit of time. Let's say the next level down, they're missing one of those required criteria that were described in this little description right here. Maybe in the next level down, they're missing more than one required criteria. And then at the lowest level, maybe they're missing all the criteria from the highest level. So that's one technique that you might use to save a little bit of time if you're writing your descriptions.
So on when you're actually grading, do you then, I mean, I would feel compelled to say what that missing criteria.
Yeah, and you can do that when you're grading.
I know you can put it into the comments section, but
you can put it into the comments section, but you can also add feedback to a particular criteria. You can go ahead and add feedback here. I don't really know why you would do that, honestly, without seeing a particular submission.
Right, that's right. Yeah,
but yeah, let's go over to grading an assignment because it seems like we've got a couple of questions about that. So let's say we've got an assignment Dropbox, and I've got a example assignment here. Well, first we have to attach the rubric to the assignment. So that can be done in an assignment Dropbox that's in the Properties tab. If you go to edit the folder, scroll down, and then there's the option to add rubric, and we pick that from the list. So this is the one that I showed you earlier. And that attaches that rubric to that assignment. Save and close. And then we've got a student who submits a assignment, and then we're going to go grade it. So we've got this essay here. And this is the new, quote unquote, the new evaluation experience, where the rubric, your overall feedback, and the grade is over on the right-hand sidebar. If we go over here, we can expand the rubric out, and we see we've got all of those criteria and descriptions for each performance level laid out here. So as you're going through, you're reading the essay, you're like, oh yeah, they've got accurate, factually correct answers. They've got, maybe they could provide a few more examples. We'll score them proficient on that. The reasoning was maybe a little unclear. Just check that, but it's very easy, just checking the boxes. And Deborah, you just asked, if you could add specific feedback on a specific criteria, and yes, so you can provide overall feedback down here in this box. That's general to overall how they did on the assignment. But you can also go in the rubric and add feedback.
Yeah, I've done both actually.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Oh, you've done this before.
If I'm getting really tired and if I've done the feedback in the rubric, sometimes I just say see feedback.
Yeah, it depends.
I don't have to,
Yeah, and those students that kind of, like I said, kind of fall between the cracks, as I mentioned before, you may have to do a whole lot more explaining and provide a whole lot more feedback to explain exactly why you assigned a particular score, or why they didn't meet kind of the exemplary criteria for something. So you could put, you can even phrase it as a question. I like to phrase it as a question often. So for evidence and examples, like something like, could you provide an example of what you mean? It really just depends on the student submission, what you think would be most useful to them, whether or not you choose to provide targeted feedback based on each criteria, or kind of just overall notes. So you may, this is down here, this is more like overall, good job.
Yeah, that's right. But so in a
Some
writing
feedback
class,
above.
we're grading the write on the assignment and the turn it in.
Oh yeah, okay. So let's go over to
So,
turn it in.
so I don't
And
do as much of this add feedback when I'm doing writing, but when I did reading, where I'm not going to be putting in a lot of corrections or things like add an example or, this kind of thing.
yeah, well,
Then I did find the add feedback useful, but
yeah. Do you
but
want to take a look at GradeMark and turn it in?
yes, Quincy, I would like to too. That's where I had all of my issues.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, let's go over there then. So to get to GradeMark, you probably already know this. Edit GradeMark. So if you're grading over here, there is a rubric option here, and I'm gonna confess, Deborah, I have not played with this very much. So, but I'm happy to try to work through this and figure out what's going on here. Because I think it gives you a couple of, how do I get out of this? It gives you a couple of options.
There's a close box at the bottom.
Oh, it's at the bottom. I've got too many windows blocking it, the chat window.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you not have the option to add your own rubric? Because it's coming up with what looks like a default rubric.
Well, I'd have to go look in my writing class, and I'm on my laptop, so I really can't see too much at once.
Mm-hmm.
I should have gone to the desktop where I could bring up.
Oh, yeah.
I'd use two browsers, and I could bring up my stuff and then eventually share it. But I don't remember. I remember having the rubric on the side, in the new evaluation thing. And also, I guess maybe I grade them first and turn it in. The corrections right on the page. And then I think the rubric was on the side, so I could do the rubric. I'd have to go look in one of my writing courses.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm open to just exploring this a little bit, if you don't mind. But I am going to be doing a little bit of trial and error here, just because I personally just haven't used this. So
I think I'm gonna take this over to my desktop and open my writing course and see what it looks like.
yeah, I'm creating. So I just created a rubric. Let's just see. Does it now? Can I attach it to this assignment? I've got this. Attach to assignment on. Yes, that's what we want. Is this kind of what you had used before, Deborah? Where it shows up over here and you can.
No, I don't think that's. I'm just I have to go back to an old course.
Yeah. Well, that may be something we can explore more.
But I'll listen, and if I find anything that's relevant, I'll let you know.
Okay. Yeah. Well. Yeah. Keep me in the loop, and I'm happy to stay after if you want to work on this together, and we can look at it. It would be helpful to look at your particular course, just because you already got this set up. Quincy, have you used the Turnitin Feedback Studio, the rubrics in there before?
I've never used the rubrics. What I tend to do, and maybe I am doing extra work, is I do the grade mark and I mark comments, and then what I actually do is I copy and paste a rubric into the HTML editor and fill it out there. Is what I do.
Okay. Okay.
So I was thinking about taking that second part and doing it in the attaching the rubric through D2L, but apparently that might be way more work than I need to be doing if I can do it all in D2L or all in GradeMark.
Yeah, I think, yeah, your option is going to be either do it all in D2L or do it all in Turnitin grade mark. Because they don't talk to each other. I don't think you can attach a rubric you design in D2L to appear in grade mark. As far as I know, you'd have to create a rubric inside, Turnitin like we
Well,
just
I
did
have
here.
one here,
Oh, you do?
I think.
Well,
And I'm
maybe.
looking,
Uh-huh.
it's
D-
but the thing is, I know I also do, I don't see my Turnitin. I'm trying to figure out, what happens, and maybe when I was on the old evaluation experience, I was able to do the marking in Turnitin and
Mhm.
then do the rubric also. But then in the new evaluation, I'm not getting the grade mark coming up now that I have the rubric up. I mean,
Okay.
I've got an essay, it's been, the rubric scored, it's 97. But
Mhm.
the only thing I'm getting is that first page, where you can't really put a lot of comments on.
Hmm.
Have the little thing
Are you
that you click to get it, turn it in.
are you at a place where you could share your screen, Deborah?
I'd have to Zoom. I'd have to get into Zoom on this computer.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, if it's going to be too
Which I
complicated,
can.
like
I can do that while we're talking.
yeah, because we may need to just follow up and take a look at your course in particular, just because I'm not entirely sure what it is that you're seeing there.
I had an issue where I could, once I started put a rubric attached to an assignment,
Mhm.
like we've been discussing, then I couldn't turn it in to come up. Whereas
Oh, well,
before,
did
so
you
I mean, I don't want to.
do you have Turnitin enabled on that assignment? If you
Yes,
go to the assignment pages, you've got the icon Turnitin enabled.
I'm
Um,
pretty sure. I have to go back. This is from like 2 semesters ago or something.
and
Yeah,
you'll
I think
also have to enable if you go.
I've got the little person. I've got the pencil.
Let me retrace my steps because I went through that a little fast. But if you have an assignment and you click Edit Folder and then go to the Turnitin tab, um, did you have Enable Grade Mark for this folder checked as well?
I'm just looking. Is this with under submission and completion or evaluation and feedback? Yeah, one rubric added, Turnitin enabled.
Are you
Maybe we should just do this afterwards, because
Yeah, I want to be helpful to you, and I apologize that I'm not entirely sure where to go to match what it is
no, I
exactly you're
think I'm going
seeing
to
on your
have to show
screen.
you because this
Mm-hmm.
was a big problem for everybody.
Yeah, well,
that I just stopped trying to figure out because I got a reading course, but now I have a writing course, so I get.
oh yeah, well, you definitely want it to work with Turnitin. Um, and that is one of the frustrating things about D2L rubrics is that I feel like rubrics are most beneficial really for essays, but they don't speak to Turnitin, which is really a necessity for student essays. Um, yeah. Um, but I'm happy to workshop that issue with you after this.
Okay.
We're kind of at the point where I'm open to taking any kind of particular questions. If you have any, Quincy, Deborah, I'll just have to follow up with you about what it is exactly you're
Okay.
seeing, so where we can share your screen and walk through it. But
Once we,
Quincy, yeah.
yeah, once we create a rubric, how can
Mhm.
we move it into another course? Do we just use import, export, copy components, or can
Yep.
we download the file? How do we do it?
Yes, you can copy it over just like any other component of a course. If you go to Edit Course, go to Import, Export, Copy Components, search for an offering, I wonder if it'll let me do the same course that I'm in currently. Nope. So let me think about that for a second. Try to think of a course that has a rubric in it that I'm sure has a rubric in it. Okay. So you'll find the course, add it, and then select components. And then rubrics, you can either import all of the rubrics or select individual items to copy. Continue. And then you can pick which particular rubrics you want to import to the course. So yeah, you can do it just like pretty much any other component in a course, and copy it over to another course.
Great.
And if you copy an entire course, the rubrics will also come with it as well.
Okay.
Was there anything else that you would like me to work through or that you'd like to see, either Quincy or Deborah, other than that Turnitin thing, which we'll work on?
I think I want to go play with
I've got you
it.
on 2 computers now.
Oh yeah, I just saw Deborah Bart come in on another device. So,
And I think I'm going to go play with it. And if I run into any hiccups, can I shoot you an email?
absolutely, yes, you
Great.
can. You can email me. I'm gonna drop my email in the chat for you guys. Or you can also go to the online learning address, and if I don't answer, somebody will. So either one of those should be good. And any questions that you have with rubrics or with anything else in D2L, I'm happy to help. Just shoot me an email and we can work on it.
Great, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, well, I'm going to let you all to it. I've got to get ready for another Zoom meeting.
Oh, okay, great. Well, have a great
Thanks.
rest of your afternoon, Quincy.
You
Thanks for
too.
coming
Thank
in.
you.
All
Bye.
right, bye.
Bye, Quincy.
Okay, one second. I'm going to stop recording here.